We always talk about hiking on the podcast, Greg. Just stick with me. This is a real hike. We're going to have a special series of episodes unpacking our 2024 trends report. We're almost near the peak. Almost there. And Greg, this is actually, we're not at we haven't summited yet, but this is our third and final episode in this special series, unpacking the trends report. So thank you for staying with me. I know you stay well hydrated. I'm sure there's a bottle of water off to your left. There it is.
There you go.
There it is. That's how he gets that golden glow. Now, today, Greg, as you'll recall in a previous episode, we talked about our near and dear friend, data center, the foundational, the physical layer of the technology stack. And today, we're talking about another very familiar friend, and that is network connectivity.
Near and
how do you
dear
feel?
Very
near it. I mean, you got the
hand in hand.
They do hand in glove. Is one the cool older brother or sister to the other? We can hash that out. And we have the perfect guest as always to help us do that. Let's welcome into the podcast the one, the only, Jake Cummins. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a rainy/snowy day out here in Colorado. It's nice. I'll take it.
It is April. I don't want to date the episode, but it's the spring, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yes, still rain and snow. So be it. Jake Cummins, UPSTACK Partner Managing Director, over 20 years of experience in telecommunications, delivering expertise for clients across network, data center, cloud, and voice. And we very much know firsthand that you are very much a leading strategic partner to some of the biggest brands in the world. So glad you could spare a few moments of your time to be with us before you get back to those clients who
Absolutely.
are so appreciative of your support. Welcome to the show. We've got a list, or we've got a rabid group of listeners, Jake, who are actually might be surprised to hear connectivity made the trends report. Does that seem like an easy one? Well, I think rightfully so. It did make the trends report. We have a number of subjects around connectivity that we want to touch on, but it's probably, I don't know, where do we start, Greg? What do you think? What does connectivity look like today, guys? To be honest, I don't want to assume anything. Is it evolving rapidly? What are the big push or pulls in the industry? As always, I like to set the landscape before we dig deeper.
It's still what drives everything. I mean, you could have the greatest application, the greatest servers and platform and everything on your cloud, but you have terrible connectivity. You might as well have nothing. It's what drives every application you use today. It's what allows us to do this podcast, and me, come through and an HD video, and you be in your home office and being able to do this, Alex. It's what drives everything. So I would say that it's still one of the most critical factors to everything that we do on a daily basis. And is it evolving? Is it changing? Some ways, yeah. I mean, consumers and enterprises and everything more alike is more in demand of high quality connectivity, high speed, low latency, things like that. Not to go off topic, but you look at something like Starlink. I mean, I could see where Starlink was personally for me, it was a game changer. I have a place up in the mountains that I had a HughesNet, a satellite before, and it was really tough to do much of anything. Starlink, I can have video phone calls. I could do this up there, on my Starlink, kind of connection. So it's I'd say it's rapidly changing, evolving. New things are coming out, and it's an exciting time for the boring topic of connectivity.
Well said, my friend. It is definitely the gas in the car, right, these days. And I'm not going to put it up there with electricity, but it's up there. So I agree with everything Jake said. The demand is growing exponentially every day.
And I'd imagine the pandemic probably helped accelerate that growth as we went remote, and now there's work from anywhere or hybrid work. Safe to say, the distributed workforce is helping accelerate the adoption and maybe even the evolution of connectivity?
Absolutely. I mean, you'd look at, and again, not to keep touting some firsthand experience, but you look at a lot of Colorado has a lot of small mountain towns, a lot of places that are very desirable for people to want to be and live, but very traditionally were really tough to get, solid connectivity. It made it very difficult for that remote worker. Now with, a lot of the broadband grants that have gone out and things like Starlink and the expansion of networks, you can get, fiber to your home in, some pretty remote places, and you can plug in a Starlink and in 15 minutes be, up and running with 35 milliseconds of latency and 150 megs of bandwidth. So that's driven that, and not only has it driven that remote worker in the push for connectivity, but it's driven the economies and changed the economies of many of these little places that used to be, used to have a shoulder season. You look at places like Breckenridge, Colorado, Pagosa Springs, Colorado, remote places, that now there's no shoulder season. It's people are there all the time, and it's that was spurred by this, the ability for people to realize, hey, I can actually do what I need to do anywhere I can get a solid connection.
In the trends report, work from home, the top trend underneath connectivity. And there's many mentions about the availability, which you just touched on. That has grown. The quality has improved tremendously. Was it Pagosa Springs that you're talking about? You can have HD quality video streaming in a tiny mountain town. But security came up as well, Jake. Security always comes up in conversation. I'd imagine that needs to go hand in glove. And you have a distributed workforce, when your team is working from anywhere, what is the security overlay when it comes to connectivity in this new era of remote work?
There's lots of things. It's not to go off topic, but it's funny when security comes up today. When you see AT&T breach they had a rated data breach of 76 million users, critical information. That's crazy. But you look at a lot of the with the distributed workforce, things that were spurred by the pandemic. You look at companies like Zscaler that are that layer on top of your PC or your cell phone, that no longer do you need to have physical hardware to protect a user's traffic. You can do it with an application. You look at things like Netscope, the cloud application security brokerage product that allows you to really control, helps with shadow IT and showing, putting some layers of control on what those remote workers and what those remote users are doing. As you have that much larger distributed workforce with incredible connectivity, it opens up some vulnerabilities on that security front. But it also spurred a market for these tools that solve a lot of those problems in very efficient ways.
So Jake and Greg, another trend that popped up in the report was around, you talk about software, SD-WAN. SD-WAN, that pop, both the adoption, the migration, as well as the implementation of SD-WAN. But also what we found is some companies appear to be slow to adopt the technology. I don't know whether they're on MPLS and they're happy enough with it. I'm just curious, Jake, what are you seeing around SD-WAN in terms of the biggest upsides that a company can experience should they migrate away from something like MPLS?
Well, I mean, the biggest upsides are, you no longer are tied to like expensive local access and things like that if you're an enterprise client. So as an enterprise, you kind of have a little bit more control over your traffic and your applications and how you want to use your network. The ability to take a device and plug in, maybe a fiber connection, a coax connection, and then like an LTE or satellite connection to really build ultimate redundancy. I think that's really cool. And how SD-WAN is kind of, evolved into the SASE play, integrating the security at the edge. I think that's really cool. But to your last point, I was on a call with a client this morning, a large global company that still uses MPLS, and they're just hesitant to move onto SD-WAN. And I wouldn't say that SD-WAN is it's been around for a little while, but it's still there's still an adoption rate. But that customer was hesitant because of the quality of service they got from the MPLS connectivity, and they knew that was rock solid. But we've also seen extremely large enterprises succeed with the SD-WAN / SASE play and really create lots of efficiencies and cost savings and simplify their networks almost by introducing that technology.
There's a lot of if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality
Yeah,
right now, just
absolutely.
because the laundry list of things to do within an organization are just so big, and most of them are understaffed, so they really have to pick and choose. And if your network's working, it's only when it comes down to crunch time, cost savings, better performance, high availability that they start to really look at these things. So Jake, I have a question for you, right? So I'm sitting here, and more clients are looking for those 100 gig handoffs, right? Data center side, and more it's coming up empty-handed, right? And Alex, just to kind of describe to the audience what this means is you get 100 gigs of throughput, whether you use it or not, right? Shows the growth in the capacity demands in the market. And when it's not available and they have to actually physically go in and upgrade the hardware within that data center to accommodate that, that shows that there's starting to be more demand than there is availability. What do you think about that, Jake? Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, what 5-6 years ago was like 10 gigs the new 1 gig. Now it's like 100 gigs the new 10 gig. It's like a lot of our customers are only ordering 100 gig ports, and they're ordering multiple in these data centers. So what we're seeing is exactly what you mentioned. There's not availability. There's capacity issues. We have one large client who has kind of moved out of the core carrier hotel data centers to kind of more economical but really hardened facilities that we wouldn't put into the realm of connectivity like a 56 Marietta or a 350 Cermak. So not only those data centers aren't 100 gig capable, but now they also have to get either dark fiber or 100 gig wave transport back to the core carrier hotel to meet those capacity requirements. So and that even that's hard to come by because the carriers simply just don't have they don't have the cards, they don't have the physical hardware, and they really need to upgrade capacity. If you look at like a carrier like Lumen right now, Lumen's got a pretty big project. We were just on a call with a customer looking at the Dallas market, and Lumen's upgraded their entire market down there, at least their core rings, to 400 gig in an effort to be able to provide more capacity, more 100 gig capability to these different data centers, especially in these I'd call them, I guess,
Secondary.
yeah, or secondary or internet intensive markets where it's the amount of usage is just going through the roof.
So, sorry,
Go
Alex.
ahead. Take it.
I've also noticed, which is really interesting, is you have these major availability zones for all the big, let's call it the big three, right? Amazon, Google, Azure.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, having 5 availability zones in the U.S. was working. Right now, with some of these latency sensitive applications and a lot of these kind of secondary and tertiary markets coming online, I'm not seeing the availability of these availability zones in these other markets, which are starting to become a requirement. How do you think that they're going to address this? Are they going to stand up more POPs? Are they going to go across the nation?
I don't know. Edge computing has been a buzzword for a long time, right? And kind of, that could be lots of different things. It could be, hey, I've got a shipping container that I retrofitted into like a mini data center, and you can access your applications from there at a decent scale. Or is what could be this evolution of edge computing? Is it really now going into these secondary and tertiary markets like you mentioned, and those become on ramp points, for these large hyperscale providers. So a Colorado Springs, Colorado, I consider that probably a tertiary market. 500,000 people. Not a huge city by any means, but like there's probably enough business and economy down there to drive low latency connectivity to your key applications that are being consumed on those platforms.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to make sure I understand this, the capacity constraints of the providers, the workarounds or the potential alternate solutions. Jake, you mentioned dark fiber, and what was the other?
Like wavelength services.
Yeah, wavelength service. So yes, are the providers working on improving capacity? You gave the Lumen example, but it seems like connectivity isn't evolving fast enough. There's more capacity needed. Is it coming, or do buyers of IT services need to start looking for alternative solutions because it's not coming fast enough?
I mean, I think it's coming. I mean, right? It's more of like a hardware limitation, right? Fiber optics it's the speed of light, but there's not hardware out there that unfortunately can procure that type of bandwidth. Yeah, and I know that I think the most recent, and Greg, correct me if you saw something different, but I'm pretty sure they did I know they did an 800 gig or something test, but also I think there was a terabit, kind of A to Z test point using some newer age equipment. So I think it's evolving. It's just a little bit slower, and even probably 10 years, I don't know that anybody would have predicted the amount of growth that you're seeing with everything being in a digital manner.
Yeah.
So think chicken and egg, Alex, right? So you have a situation where 3 years ago they upgraded a data center. Let's take Zayo for instance. Upgraded one of the meet me rooms in a data center with 10 gig capacity. Now everybody's demanding 100 gig capacity. 3 years later, so they just invested in 10 gig hardware. Now they have to invest in 100 gig hardware, and it's not cheap. And it's going to be driven by demand. So how much do you buy and install? You don't want to overbuy, and these large providers are notorious for just dragging their feet on installation. Right? Even if something's lit service, you're looking at 45, sometimes 90 days to be installed. Why? I don't know. Right? So now add a layer of needing to procure hardware, get somebody physically on site to install that hardware, can take that 90 days to 180 days. So you can imagine how you have to plan as an IT professional nowadays when you really need large capacity.
Break out your crystal ball. The constraints and connectivity are reminding me of constraints that we spoke about recently around data centers. So maybe let's go there. Let's explore a little further. In the pre-call, this concept of the fabric came up. Greg, what are we talking about when we say fabric?
So obviously data centers are looking to evolve and get closer to connectivity. They have for many, many years. So fabric allows a data center to essentially take all of its assets and tie them together, allowing companies to do unique things like DR easily, right? With replication between sites. It also allows for easy access to third parties like Amazon and other on-ramps. It's a pretty good play. Jake, these other data centers are using companies like Megaport and Packet Fabric to make up for their lack of their own fabric, right? Yep. How do you feel about that play, and how are those companies doing?
Obviously everybody I think is trying to compete with Equinix here. I think they've got that story really well buttoned up in terms of what they've built out and the investments they've made in companies that they've acquired over the years, and how they've used those assets and integrated them in with their data center ecosystems. I think what you can do within an Equinix facility over a single cross connect is pretty incredible. It solves a lot of challenges, especially with today's opportunities for direct peering, direct connects to cloud providers, bare metal services, things like that. So I mean, I think they're definitely a leader in that particular space. But as you mentioned, there are alternatives. There's companies that are Packet Fabric does a great job of quickly procuring A to Z connectivity in major data centers with a couple of mouse clicks. So you talk about like the mega carrier taking 90 to 180 days to install a 10 gig service between two sites. You can literally do it with Packet Fabric in about 48 hours, and you can do it by just a couple of point and clicks and getting your LOAs, and you're off to the races. So and they're also doing that to is alternatives to connect to big hyperscale platforms. So I think there are some workarounds, and folks are the other data centers are evolving to kind of meet that need, because it does simplify a very complicated network environment to be able to do some of these things, um, via a single pane of glass, I guess is the best way to look at it.
It should be easy. It's
Yeah,
important, right? It's critical. It should be
it's
easy.
critical. Like you said, it's the gas in the car. I mean, you could have you got 1,000 racks sitting in a data room somewhere, but if your connectivity sucks, you're not going anywhere.
I've seen so many clients do a poor job at planning and have their data center up months before the connectivity is ready. And it's just
Yeah,
like, why are you paying, excess money for your data center when it's not even usable?
yeah,
I'm sure you've seen it too.
yeah. And I mean, not to get off on a tangent here, but the name Cloud Connection came from a conversation I had with a gentleman who was one of my first clients, who was kind of really ahead of the curve on the cloud game. And him and I were talking, and he's like, yeah, we've built out these incredible, like, live or like real time and like DR environments for these customers. And then we go to turn it up and they want to run it over like Comcast coax. And he's like, it's just so hard to explain that doesn't work. And like light bulb went off, and I'm like, man, what? This was like back in 2012, early days of this, and I'm like, man, I think there's a market in helping people connect to the cloud, because it's going to be important. And I have one of the top brains in the business telling me that these enterprise clients of his don't even think about it, and then it becomes a big problem, and it makes their cloud look bad. And I'm like, wait, if I could explain that this is how you got to do this, maybe I could help some customers out, and maybe I could create a little business for myself. And that's where the idea of the name Cloud connection to the cloud came from.
That's incredible.
We love origin stories here.
So yeah,
Love origin
that was
stories.
the Cloud Connection origin story.
We have one more topic we have to touch on related to the trends report: business continuity. We talked about SD-WAN a minute ago. I'd imagine the advent of SD-WAN has had an impact on business continuity in some way, shape, or form. I mean, what is the current state of I guess, redundancy or business continuity as it relates to connectivity today?
I mean, I think things like SD-WAN have really. I mean, let's just face it. If you have a large retail location that's driven by credit card transactions, and that ever goes down with today's technologies, like I just don't think you're being fiscally responsible, because there's so many ways to keep that connectivity up and running with today's technologies, that you should never lose a dollar due to an outage. What do you? I mean, do you think that's a little bit too aggressive, Greg? Or I mean,
No, I think you're spot on. Well, but sometimes they learn the hard way, right? And somebody loses a job, but they realize, now we have to implement, different technology to ensure that we have the proper redundancy. So I agree with you.
yeah. So I mean, I think the evolution of the network connectivity, Alex, is we talked about earlier. I think that has been a boon for like DR and things like that. It makes it significantly easier now to put a high availability strategy in place, so you don't have the downtime issues that companies were previously plagued with, and especially those those high dollar transactional businesses. I think that's where it's most important. It's pretty easy. Something goes down at the office, the team goes home and connects to their laptop, or plugs in a LTE card, or tethers off their cell phone. That's there's really no stop there. But like where there's high dollars being exchanged, that it's driven by managing that connectivity. There's really no excuse these days to have that. There's really no excuse to go down. Really, I think. I mean,
Alex, it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? And I think that you have companies that have their heads down, focused, working 80-hour weeks, again, limited staff. They're implementing procedures and processes that they've been doing for 20 years. Again, not to fault, right? They just don't have the time to look at innovation, and this is where and Jake and I have been able to add a tremendous amount of value to our clients, because we don't just see it across a single stack; we see it across all stacks, and who's doing really good things and who's doing really poor things, and that's important. You need those extra set of eyes.
Exactly. The significant benefit of working with an experienced, trusted third-party partner like a Jake Cummins, like a Greg Moss, like an UPSTACK. And that might be the perfect point to end on. Anything else we haven't covered, though, before we do officially end, before we take a break on our hike, Jake and Greg, ever so briefly?
I need the rest.
Okay.
No, I want to make a prediction, and I'd love Jake more than anyone in this world to weigh in on this prediction. It's 50-50. It involves connectivity, so this is why I feel it's appropriate to mention in this episode. So, there's still a lot of attrition happening in the big three. They don't see it, right, because they still have that top line revenue growth, right, with all the kind of late adopters. At some point, they're going to have to go and compete with data centers, right? So if you look at Equinix, who's doing a wonderful job at what we call real hybrid, they don't own the public cloud, right? But they provide that easy access onto the public cloud. And then you look at the public cloud, who's expensive. People don't realize it till they're there, right? But when they do realize it, then start to pull out some of their infrastructure back into data center and private cloud or bare metal. So what are they going to do when they stop having that top line revenue? Right, and they start to really, really realize that they're a trading business. Are they going to go and buy a data center? Is Microsoft or Amazon or Google going to buy Equinix? Because you can't control the connectivity market. You can't just buy one provider and say, "Oh, I can lower my ingress egress traffic costs." It's all peering. It's all public access, right? So it's hundreds of carriers, thousands and if not millions of miles of fiber. So I personally think that something like that could happen in the next 2 to 5 years.
I mean, it could. I mean, it would be incredibly synergistic for a Microsoft to buy an Equinix, right? I mean, they own the public cloud. Now they I always say Equinix owns the internet, really, because like they sit on the internet in every major spot. There's very few sites that aren't Equinix data centers that are the largest peering points in the world. With the exception of maybe like a One Wilshire, or that's not an Equinix facility, but there's just a few. But I mean, think about that, the synergy there. We now own this incredible revenue stream that's incredibly sticky, and it's really not going anywhere. So that's an interesting thought for sure. I never really I hadn't put much thought into thinking of it that way, but when the way you mentioned it, with seeing that there's just these trickles of revenues that are only going to continue to turn from trickles to waterfalls as clients get smarter and things become easier to accomplish. That how are they gonna sustain those revenue streams and the growth? I mean, gosh. Something like that would be an easy way to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Greg, that's why you're so tired. on this hike up the Tech Trends Mountain because you packed your crystal ball. Next time, leave it.
That's good.
Leave it at home. Leave it at home. I'm tired of dragging you up this hill. Jake Cummins, thank you for joining us today. We
Absolutely.
always appreciate your perspective, and we know
Very much so.
connectivity and data center are just two of the many, many, many things that you're an expert in. But
thank you guys for having me on.
Your time. Greg, great to see you, my friend.
Always a pleasure, baby.
We're not done yet. We've come this far. I think we need to keep going just a little farther. What do you think?
I'm exhausted, Alex.
No, stop. Come on. We spent no there. Well, as we know, what did we establish? The IT landscape is ever evolving. We are never done. We are never done. No matter where we may go, no matter what we do, IT is always evolving. Technology is always evolving. But we have come this far. We've been working our way through our 2024 Tech Trends report, touching on a number of key areas for IT leaders, technology buyers to focus on. And we've now arrived at a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and maybe not as traditional as some others. It's IoT time. What does IoT stand for, Greg?
Internet of Things.
Yes, this is where I confess to you that during the pandemic, I developed a wicked IoT habit where I now have a full smart home, much to my wife's chagrin. But we're not going to go there. That's not what this special episode is about. Not at all. Instead, it's time to bring in one of our trusted colleagues to talk about the Internet of Things and its application to enterprises and mid-market businesses the world over. So we are joined today by the one, the only, Mr. Michael Rafferty. Mike Rafferty, welcome to the UPSTACK podcast.
Mikey.
Thank you, guys.
We know you've been waiting patiently for months on end to make your debut appearance in the UPSTACK podcast, and here we are. Now it's my.
If I look blue in the face, it's because I've been holding my breath for so long. I'm finally here, so thank you.
Just breathe. This is a casual conversation. A casual conversation. Mike Rafferty, to introduce you to the audience, you are an information technology expert, over 20 years of experience in the industry, currently serving as a managing director with the UPSTACK team. What did I miss in terms of background?
No, I mean, 25 years plus in terms of...
You can date yourself.
Yeah,
that's not what I'm here for.
I know that's hard to believe for everyone watching, but no. It's a varied background. Excited to be here to talk about IoT because, as you mentioned in your opening, Alex, it's not a traditional product and service that technology advisors like ourselves have been involved with traditionally over the years. I'm sure Greg can attest to that as well, but it was something that caught my interest, probably 5 or 6 years ago, and it's been proven to be very exciting in pursuing opportunities around this technology.
That's why you're the perfect guest, because we know you've worked with clients of varying sizes, large enterprises down to the mid-market on a variety of solutions. And IoT, as you mentioned, has come up perhaps more recently over that 25-year career. So let's start there. How were you introduced to IoT, professionally?
Yeah.
How did that come about? Just curious how you broke into that vertical.
So as many of you know, 10 years ago or so, maybe 12 years ago, the whole thought of like smart cities and smart homes was fascinating to me. The ability to, have your refrigerator notify you when the milk is running low and you'd get an alert and you'd run off to the grocery store to fulfill those shortages. So that topic was of interest to me. And then of course, as mobility and wireless technology continued to develop, certain cellular and wireless companies started to announce that they had IoT platforms. And really what it boiled down to was, having the ability to have SIM cards or multi-carrier SIM cards, even better yet, put into devices that would enable companies to track assets. And typically it was in the logistics industry where one of these wireless devices could be put on a trailer or what have you, and it would report back to some center to notify what geographic location that was. And that was a great application. And we had plenty of suppliers in our industry that could offer that type of service. But, that was only the transport mechanism of IoT. I wanted to, and at this time, I should interrupt myself and say that I started seeing terms like big data and, how important data was to companies and how do you harvest this data and make it actionable. So it was almost like the confluence of these two things coming together. I had a friend in town who asked, he knew my background. He knew I was in the technology space, and he happened to be a lean consultant for a very big defense contractor. So his whole role was finding areas within the operation that they can improve efficiency. So he asked me, hey, can we grab a cup of coffee some morning? And we got together at the local Starbucks, and he said, listen, we are losing so many millions of dollars a year in raw materials at our factory. They just we can't find raw materials, and then the manufacturing operations will order a whole new set of raw materials to replace the ones that we couldn't find, and it's costing us millions of dollars. Do you know anyone that can do asset tracking? And a light bulb went off in my head, and we had this very unique but not well-known supplier that kind of fit that gap. And it started with a very basic use case. And it started with they were losing materials, and then it migrated into all sorts of other applications internally. And the business cases keep coming about, and we keep solving for them.
Wait, they were losing materials in their own factory?
Yes. Or materials would be damaged. They'd have to replace, because they were in an area of the factory that they shouldn't have been placed. But yeah, believe it or not, the loss of raw materials. And I don't know if we're going to talk about ROI, but real quickly, in that specific case of raw materials being lost, the organization saw an ROI of $1.8 million per year in recovering lost materials. Yeah.
I need to invest in more air tags. Sorry, Greg. Go ahead.
This has been, I've been looking forward to this podcast because it's actually one of the areas I'm super light in, and one of the things I really want to learn more about. So I'm excited, Mike. One of the big questions I have is, what does the growth or evolution of this space looked like over the last decade? Right? Curious.
Yeah,
investing in it is the need growing?
Yeah, I think it's a loaded question. I think the adoption is quite a bit slower than everyone expected. I mean, even as of today, I saw a recent stat being released that only 25% of manufacturing companies are able to gather useful data from their operating floors. And that I shouldn't just limit that to manufacturing companies. I think that's across all enterprises. So, and then of course, those that do it well still don't do it to completion. So there are a lot of digital blind spots within their organization where they're just not capturing data that on which they can, conduct actions. And that's a problem because as you talk, the word digital transformation or the phrase was very popular, and that's been kind of replaced by AI and the confluence of AI coming into the scene. And what does that mean? And I know we'll talk about AI because that's kind of one of the subjects of the technology trend report. It's coming, but businesses are trying to use AI in IoT, but they don't have nearly as complete a picture of the data that they want. So the AI is not really as successful as it can be until they can start getting those data points aggregated.
But I'd imagine, so that early on, IoT and AI are early on in their relationship. It sounds like
Very early.
working on it. Okay.
Yeah, I think if I look back, if only 25% of companies are effectively gathering data today, I would have expected it to have been a lot higher adoption level by 2024. But that just provides more opportunity moving forward, right?
Right. And as we know, it can accelerate pretty rapidly too.
Sure.
Can I jump back for a sec, guys?
Yeah.
So you mentioned I think it was defense contractor. So government would be the industry. What are some other industries where IoT has the most application today? And I ask because we have listeners who are they're IT leaders across any number of industries, frankly.
Yeah. I think it's important to kind of talk about what IoT can really solve, right? So we talked about asset tracking. That was, the area or the example I used with raw materials. Number two would be understanding the health of machines, right? So we'll put asset tags, for example, or tracking tags on a machine to understand the health of it. If it's vibrating too frequently, that might mean that it needs a service or maintenance window. So they'll shut that particular machine down. That's the second. And then, of course, basically understanding what the environmentals might be in a particular area has value. Temperature, humidity, whether or not something is out of line in an XY coordinate. That's not really an environmental, but that would be something that would be of particular interest. So if you take those three high-level categories of the types of data points that can be gathered from IoT asset tags, healthcare is a big industry, right? Operating rooms that aren't at the proper temperature or humidity and they need to be shut down. I mean, that can cost a hospital tens, if not thousands of hundreds of dollars, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. The consumer CPG companies, with their product lines and manufacturing, obviously, as I mentioned, the defense contractors, big industrial manufacturers that have, machine manufacturing, aerospace, aeronautical, aviation. Those are the types of industries that have expensive assets or expensive product that they're developing, have long periods of manufacturing or many multi-step manufacturing processes. Those are industries that are really benefiting from IoT. I'll give a quick example. I mentioned this multi-step manufacturing. I don't know why that came to mind right away, but we had a customer that was able to identify a flaw in the second step of a 35-step manufacturing process. So before understanding that the yield of the product was faulty at step 35, they were able to identify it at step 2, correct the problem, go back to step 1, and get a complete yield out of that product.
Through IoT?
Through IoT.
Identify the fault.
Yes.
Okay.
I find it interesting you mentioned healthcare. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, right? You have the ability to, do predictive maintenance, right? So you can know when things potentially could fail. And in some sort of healthcare or medical environment, that seems like it could be pretty incredible.
Exactly right. Yep. And the
Michael,
form factors, Greg, of these asset tags continue to get smaller, right? I mean, when I started with this first project 6 years ago, I mean, they were the size of a $50 and maybe, a half an inch thick. And now they're literally being printed on stamps where the circuit board is embedded in the stamp. And it's a completely flat surface. And, they typically, they have batteries in them, but now they're being released with batteryless circuit boards that happen to be powered by, these devices that circulate through the factory and send a
Static
power surge. Yeah, it's incredible.
That's how I keep track of Greg when it's time to record a
Yes.
podcast. That's
Yes.
why I told you I was a fan of the smart home and in
Well,
IoT.
wearables is a big thing too, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Very, very much so. And so there, in the consumer space, it feels like adoption is ahead of in the enterprise or professional space. But and you mentioned a few moments ago, Michael, that it's still early-ish days. But I'd imagine adoption has started to accelerate at least a little bit. Because you think about edge computing, for example, and the rapid increase and utilization of edge computing. Have you seen Edge, as Edge has come online, IoT started to pick up a little bit, maybe as a trailing indicator?
So it's fascinating you bring up edge computing because the area where I'm seeing it in the IoT world is it's providing an additional layer of security for the customers that are deploying IoT, right? Instead of aggregating all of your data sets in a public cloud somewhere, the ability to have some of those data sets stored locally via edge computing, or at least more local than a public cloud, provides an additional layer of security that's been really helpful. It's also quicker to it cuts down on the time loop in having data collected, stored, actually visualize, putting the data into a visualization tool, and then reporting back so that the business units can actually work off of those reports or those graphs or what have you. So we're seeing, I would say I'm seeing the benefits of edge computing. Whether or not it's promoting more IoT deployments, I haven't seen it get to that yet.
I would think 5G is playing a massive role in the ability to roll out applications that are more robust and meaningful, right?
Yes, for sure. 4G LTE, no one was really talking about it. But once 5G, the proliferation of 5G has certainly gotten more discussions around the ability to reach different areas within a particular building or particular geography for that particular client. So absolutely.
So IoT, it seems like there's the internal savings to an organization, right? Through some sort of asset management type of application. And then you have the consumer benefit, right? So if you're tying this to a refrigerator or a toaster, but I guess it's hard to demonstrate that return when it comes to consumer electronics. So you're not going to put it on a toaster, right? Because what is that data going to be worth, and where's the value? How much of the divide is consumer based, is B2B versus B2C?
Well, you can say the same thing about B2B too, right? If you're a manufacturing company and you're manufacturing widgets that cost 17 cents a piece, you're not going to invest in a highly functional IoT platform to recover costs right there, right? So similar example, like I mentioned the refrigerator.
Well, unless it's shelling off data. If it's shelling off important data and you can make money on that data, it becomes
Yeah. No, right. But in terms of asset tracking or environmentals impacting the manufacturing of those widgets, it's probably not a useful case. But similar to your example on the consumer side, you're not going to track the environmentals around a toaster. However, something around your refrigerator or your electric vehicle, for example, those are costly assets that you would like to have more insight into.
Sure. Makes sense.
Edge computing and security. I'm surprised to hear you say that. I'm always jumping back, guys. Just bear with me here. Because when you think of IoT, additional endpoints potentially to your network, although I think the example you gave with Edge, Michael, is going to the ability to separate those things, kind of containerize them, if you will. Security risks. I imagine security is a natural part of the conversation when engaging with a client when it comes to IoT. Mm-hmm. What is that conversation like? Are there particular solutions you're looking to couple or bundle with IoT?
So the security, it first starts with network segmentation, right? So when you're dealing with a company's IoT platform, you're dealing with different business units within the organization. Of course, the security and compliance departments are going to be heavily involved. And, the first thing they want to know is, of all the IP addresses in our enterprise, do we have them segmented between, Alex's desktop versus Greg's lathe back in the operations, in the manufacturing floor. So we need to make sure that we differentiate those types of IP assets. And then, depending on the type of organization, whether there needs to be, FedRAMP compliance or FISMA compliance, the different IoT platforms have different methods in which they can secure the data. For example, one of our DoD clients, they wanted to be in the AWS Gov Cloud, so we set up a data lake in the AWS Gov Cloud. But then they have actual secure areas within their manufacturing facilities that they don't allow, up until now, any data points to be drafted out of that secure area, because they couldn't run the risk of someone, whether it be a foreign entity that was actually getting access to the data coming out of that secure area. But AWS and Microsoft are developing these. They're called, special security government clouds. So secret government clouds is what they're called. So they're actually providing another level of security above and beyond the gov clouds that these public cloud hyperscalers are developing. So, I'm not a security expert at that level, but they have these compliance departments that are checking all the boxes. When you're dealing with organizations in aerospace, aviation, defense contractors, DoD, the months and years we had to go through for security, checkpoints was pretty advanced.
But important. It should be no surprise, frankly. Security is a part of every single layer of the technology stack. And why should IoT be any different?
That's correct. Yeah, especially in these industries, right, where you're dealing with, in some cases, national secrets, for example, right? I mean, very, very valuable information is being assembled in these organizations, and they need to make sure that they protect it at all costs. I don't think you'd pass the sniff test, Alex, if you showed up.
I'm actually sweating right now. I'm nervous that we're gonna. The NSA is now a listener of the UPSTACK podcast. Oh goodness! There's a knock at the door.
Consumer. Like IoT, I see a lot. I personally see a lot of the applications on the consumer side. So when you talk security, Alex, I think you bring up some really good points. Yep. We're living in a world of concern around privacy, right, and around security, especially on that consumer side. So I'd be curious to see. I mean, I'd almost feel like things in my house are watching me, right, or listening to me. Everyone's always at Alexa syndrome, right? What is Alexa doing? Is she listening to me beyond just my typical requests? This opens up, I feel like, a can of worms. I mean, have you heard anything inside the industry about concerns around privacy and security as it relates to the consumer side of IoT?
Not on the consumer side. The only thing I can think of, you brought up, where our world is today. I can say that during COVID and, with the delays in what happened to our logistic and supply lines during COVID and how that disrupted so many things in our economy, even the current geopolitical landscape is causing concern with respect to supply chain and logistics. And, when you have insights into the journey along the logistical timeline of certain products or raw materials, this is another example of where, an IoT application or an IoT project around that logistical journey can be helpful, especially in this geopolitical landscape.
IoT making supply chain more resilient?
Wow. I don't know if it's more resilient or, it's able to understand the supply chain journey a little better.
Deliver data that can be.
I agree with that. I think it's taking the flaws out of it. It's compressing it. I see that in CPG in particular. I know you mentioned that earlier in the podcast. Whether it's B2B applications and tracking products through supply chain, or actually tracking buyer behavior, right, at a store level.
Yeah. And I know that the financial industry has been rolling out some IoT, particularly around getting human feedback from their employees in the institutional branches on how consumers are interacting with their product at the branch level. To be honest with you, I deal with the IoT more in the B2B space than the B2C or the C2B, but I know listen, for everyday use, I mean, it's fascinating what this could result in the next, 5-10 years.
We should get back together and say 12 months and see how far things have traveled, because I imagine it's going to be pretty far compared to where we are today. Michael, we are obligated to give our listeners these actionable nuggets of information to take with them on their journey. We've already established one nugget of information when it comes to IoT. Segment your network.
That's correct.
Segment your network. These are endpoints. It could be a really, really valuable technology, but no need to create additional risk. Another nugget could be how to get started. Again, I'm an IT leader in an enterprise level organization. Can you start small, or is this a huge undertaking? What is the entry point here? What could that look like?
It's a great question. So the first thing is coming up with a use case, right? Hey, we have this problem we're trying to solve. Can it be solved with an introduction of some technology? We validate a use case. We do this all the time. And we don't try to boil the ocean, right? We're starting out with a very particular use case that needs to be solved. And the suppliers that we use have starter kits where, for a very nominal investment in the infrastructure that's needed, a couple of gateways, some asset tags, you can get actionable data within a matter of a couple of hours to prove out that use case. Start collecting data, understand what the data, were those the data points you were looking to collect, and what kind of action can you take on it before you invest in a long-term rollout that will take, these rollouts don't happen overnight when they're across, an industrial organization, but the benefits are incredible.
So good to know I like these starter kits. Also probably helps to have a Michael Rafferty by your side, a trusted partner who's traveled that path before and can guide you on the way.
I have great walking shoes. I've walked along a lot of manufacturing warehouse floors. I'm happy to help.
You must have a hard hat.
Oh, I have hard hat. I have goggles.
OSHA. He's gone through his OSHA classes.
He's OSHA.
Reflective vest. I mean, listen, it looks it's top notch.
If we'd known that, we would have asked you to wear it for today's episode for the video component. But
we got to re-record.
Now, while Michael's sartorial choices will not be featured, we do encourage our listeners, head to upstack.com/24 trends. That's 24 trends to read the full trends report and learn a bit more about IoT and the other trends that we've highlighted in the report. Michael, thank you for joining us today on the UPSTACK podcast. We appreciate it.
Gentlemen, two legends. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Until next time, this is the UPSTACK podcast. Thanks, everybody.